Hello and welcome back to the F2 show. Formula 2 heads to Imola for the first time in its modern era as it returns to Europe for no doubt more exciting racing. I'm your host Fraser Ford, and joining me to look ahead to this weekend we have Alpine and Mahindra test driver Jordan King, WTF1 writer Hannah Pruffock and Inside F2 writer Lawrence Griffin. Coming up on the show then, we look back on how the in-season test could impact the rest of the season. We look ahead to this weekend with lots to play for in the championship battle. And we answer your questions ahead of this weekend. Jordan, obviously great to have you with us. First time this season. How are you?
Yeah, I'm well. I've had a bit of an injury, but I'm back and recovered now, so we're all good.
And Hannah, obviously we were at the Motormouth Charity Karting Day a couple of weeks ago. Obviously all over our social media channels, some good interviews on there if anyone wants to check them out. It was sunshine to snow to sunshine, back to snow, wasn't it? It was a brilliant day though. Have you thawed out a little bit from it?
Oh, well, it was certainly an incredible day. Typical British weather seemed to change every minute. I'm just thankful I wasn't in the kart, but it was wonderful to see such amazing good people come together and raise money for two incredible causes, so the Brain Tumor Charity and for Movember. And fingers crossed we have another one later in the summer.
Absolutely, that's something for us to look forward to. And Lawrence, obviously we move into the European leg of the season now, an important part of the season, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. It's a longer season than usual this year, but this next phase of the season will have a huge part to play in who eventually emerges as champion. So I can't wait to see how it plays out.
Yeah, let's get into it then. Before we get stuck into Imola, Formula 2 obviously went to Barcelona last week. It was the championship leader, Felipe Drugovich, who set the fastest time of testing on day 3, building on his impressive start of the season. Lawrence, what were the key takeaways from testing last week?
I think one of the key takeaways for me is that the field is very tight this year. If you look at the times they were putting in, session by session, there wasn't one clear driver that was coming out on top. I think several drivers and teams will be competing for race wins throughout this season, and especially with a bit of misfortune added in for some drivers, like we've already seen in the first 2 rounds, it's going to be very mixed up as it has already been. If there's one person that has to be happy with testing, it surely will be Felipe Drugovich. His resurgence back at MP Motorsport has continued with the fastest time in testing, which of course it's only academic. There are no points for testing, but it's a real clear sign that partnership is thriving, and it's been a joy to watch how strong he's been once again. He's really demonstrating his quality, so he'll certainly be looking to take some momentum from testing into the next round in Imola.
Yeah, really strong start to the season for Felipe Drugovich. Jordan, testing probably not the most enthralling few days for the drivers, but how valuable can the information collected be for the remainder of the season?
I think there's a few things you can drag away from testing. I think the first would be the drivers that are on the back foot and they've had a bad start to the year, can't quite get comfortable with the car or set up, even if it's been a bit of bad luck. It can be a bit of a reset. It can give them a chance to really attack any issues they've got. If the team are struggling with a balance issue, they can then go after that. Or even a mechanical issue, check that they're okay. A few people have had big crashes in the car. This is actually quite a good time to get the car back in the window that you want to be in. And then you've got a mixture of, I suppose, the people that haven't had any issues and are clearly happy with their balance and are doing well in the championship. You mentioned Felipe. For someone like him, actually, it's more going to be a refining job. He's maybe we'll try something a bit out of the window and go, you know what, we'll give that a go, see if it can find us a load of lap time, and then everything else might be a bit more refining the car setup, race runs versus qualifying runs. So yeah, it can be a real mixture, but in general, it's fallen a bit differently this year because it's after a race or two, whereas previously, it is pre-season testing where it's not quite mid-season testing, but it's after races. So in general, you'll be trying different things depending on your races, where if it was true pre-season testing, then yeah, it's a complete open book.
Yeah, really interesting. Obviously, David Beckman's jumped into the Charus to replace Cem Bolek-Bassi for the final day of testing. You've just mentioned about a few crashes there, Jordan. He had a big shunt on day one of the test. He's had a difficult start to the season. How much will missing that final day of testing, how much will that impact him, Hanno, especially considering he's had limited running this season as it is, obviously missing the whole weekend in Jeddah as well?
I think it's going to be incredibly challenging for him. I feel like as all the drivers, he's got obviously probably more of a mountain climb in that obviously coming in from more of an esports background and coming through the feeder series ladder as far as some of the others have. But for him, that running, if you look at his team at Enzo Fittipaldi on the second day of testing, clocked in 50 laps in the morning session alone. It's that mileage that allows you to get a level of understanding in the car and ultimately finding the limits, because you've got an incredibly a series of incredibly challenging circuits coming up ahead, the likes of Baku, Monaco, where they need to find those limits and have a clear understanding of their car if they want to succeed. And it's not that he's had bad running, I'd say, at the start of the season. It's still very much a learning curve for him. 2 14th places in Bahrain. And so for him, missing out that testing, it kind of does put him on the back foot compared to rivals, which isn't where he'd want to be.
Yeah, fingers crossed, and obviously glad he's okay. Lawrence, is he under pressure a little bit?
Definitely. I think that there has to be some level of pressure. Of course, coming in, there's not necessarily an expectation to deliver immediately. I think everybody's quite accepting of the fact that it can take some time to get up to speed in this sport. But yeah, the pressure builds every day that you go without a result is another day where you're still yet to make that achievement. And we've seen in the past, this is a brutal sport, and even if it's not necessarily through your own fault, if performances don't go your way, you can soon find yourself without a seat. So yeah, he will be hoping to be able to deliver in the next round and demonstrate that potential that we all know that he has, that is the reason why he's in Formula 2 in the first place.
Yeah, it's a good job he doesn't have Helmut Marko as his boss, isn't it? Because I hate to think what Helmut would have to say about that. Jordan, let's look ahead to this weekend then. We haven't had the second tier of single-seater racing at Imola since 2006. It's been a while. First of all, are you glad to see a circuit as historic as Imola back on the Formula 2 calendar?
I always like driving at Imola myself. I'm not sure it's quite a Formula One track, just from the size of it. But this year could be a bit different. I mean, last year's race there was mental anyway, with the weather conditions. So that threw a curveball in there. But I think if it's completely dry, it could be a little bit of a procession. But as we've seen this year with the regulations, extra DRS zones, anything's possible. So I don't want to count the chicks too early on that one, because I might be swallowing my words. But yeah, it's a great circuit to drive, and it's a great venue to go to whenever I've been there before, whether it's coaching or driving myself. And I grew up watching F1 cars around there, so I like it from that perspective, but I'm a bit skeptical about how good the racing might be.
Last time you drove there, was it 2014 Euro F3? Is that right?
Could well be. You might know the history better than me, but yeah, it sounds about right.
Is there any similarities between the Euro F3 cars, for example, and the Formula 2 cars, and the characteristics of the cars on the track? Is there anything that they could take from previous outings in different categories? Any data?
Yeah, everyone will always be leaning on previous experience there, whether they've even just driven a road car there through to, as you mentioned, myself in Formula 3 or whatever else they have driven. Maybe even a bit of secret testing from a few teams, as there always is. All of that, lean on your knowledge to the best that you can. Even just simple things like curbs and tarmac, different types of tarmac, where the bumps are, they remain the same unless they completely resurface it or change it. But from what I can gather, it's stayed pretty similar the last few years. Simulator work now, they're pretty decent stuff with scan tracks and everything. So I know with the work I do at Alpine, they've got a pretty good model of Imola. because of the racing we've had there over the last 12 months, isn't it? So yeah, all the drivers are going to be leaning on that, either previous team experience as well. What you've got to remember is engineers are just as crucial with this, and they go to tracks with different cars all the time. So yeah, team experience, engineer experience, and driver experience. Everyone's going to be leaning very much on all of that.
Cool, good stuff. And at Jim A. Kimberley on Instagram, friend of the show, Jim, asked if you could change one thing about Imola to improve the circuit, what would it be?
I think that's quite a tough one. Going back to my previous comment, I could say open the circuit up, make it wider, but then it wouldn't be Imola, and then it wouldn't have the enjoyment that Imola brings from it. So I suppose kind of no comment. I think Formula One cars are just a little bit too quick for Imola as it is. With the amount of downforce they have and power, how big they are now as well. You put them when Formula One used to be going there back in 2004 to 2006, I think maybe the last time they raced there. You put those cars compared to this car now, and they're night and day difference in size, and that plays a big part. If you've got a 5-meter racetrack and half of it's taken up by a race car, it becomes quite difficult to overtake. So yeah, I suppose my answer is no comment on actually what to change. But yeah, for racing, make it wider, but then that might ruin Imola for what it is.
Boring. No, I'm joking. No, all good. Historically, obviously, a tough track, Lawrence, to overtake on. Formula 2 does have a bit of a habit, though, doesn't it, of breaking the mould, if you like. Are you confident, obviously, kind of similar to Jordan's point around being a bit of a narrow track, but do we think the Formula 2 cars will be more able to overtake, and we'll see a bit of overtaking this weekend?
Well, like you say, generally the Formula 2 cars succeed in overtaking where the Formula 1 cars sometimes fail. And as Jordan mentioned, last year's Formula 1 race, which was pretty wet, I had a brief glance at the weather forecast before we recorded, and at the moment there is rain forecast for Imola this weekend, which would, certainly involve some entertaining racing. Who knows where the F2 drivers might manage to overtake if there was a bit of rain out there. Now that I've said that, of course, you can be certain it won't rain. And if anybody's listening, do feel free to aim your disappointment at me on social media. But so assuming that it's going to be a dry race, I think you can probably expect less overtaking than we've seen in the first 2 rounds. As like Jordan said, it is pretty narrow. The main overtaking points are the Tamburello chicane, which will be the corner to watch at the race start as a relatively long run into that first braking zone, and then into the Tosa hairpin as well. I think that main straight is long enough to provide overtaking there, and I think the drivers are skillful enough and brave enough to surprise us and find some overtaking spots elsewhere. So I wouldn't be overly amazed if they find somewhere else to overtake. But yes, we can expect fewer overtakes than what we've seen in the past.
You are right. Potentially rain for the first time this season. 90% chance of wet weather as it stands on Friday for practice and qualifying. 40% chance of rain on Saturday and Sunday. As it stands, and we know how quickly the weather can change. But if it is wet, Hannah, does that give a bit of an advantage to the returning drivers? And is that, first time in the wet for the rookies? Is that going to be difficult for them?
I'd say it certainly gives them a helping hand. Obviously, looking at the likes of, say, Yuri Vips, who obviously stayed with the High-Tech team, and Ralph Boschung, and Liam Lawson, all of whom competed in Monaco last year when we had the wet conditions, and how incredibly challenging that was. I wouldn't say Imola would be easier, but it's certainly when you've felt kind of how the tyres react and how the cars react in wet conditions, it gives you a little bit more of a reference point, which the rookie drivers won't have. But I think for all the drivers, given that it's going to be a new circuit for many of them, the challenges that inherently poses, say the returning drivers have, to a degree, some advantage, but I don't think it's going to be a situation where the returning drivers dominate compared to the rookies. I think we've got a lot of rookies up and down that field that are getting to grips with their cars surprisingly quickly and being able to adapt. And I think as well, the wet conditions, as Lawrence said, can catch a lot of drivers out and poses kind of overtaking manoeuvres. So I think we'll have probably a lot more of a competitive field. Although, to be honest, it's Formula 2, so it's always competitive. But I think at the end of the day, those wet conditions are going to prove to be a challenge, and it'll be interesting to see which drivers are able to master it quite quickly, because there's never much room for mistakes, but in wet conditions at Imola, there's even less room.
If it is wet, who's your money on? Who are the wet weather specialists on the grid?
Oh, throwing this one at me out of nowhere. I don't know who I'd pick for that. I'm good. I don't know whether specialist, but I'm going to go for Juri Vips, because I think he's getting to grips well with the Calcio, and I think he's had strong form across this season and last season. So hopefully, maybe a good run in there.
Yeah, High Tech look really strong, leading the way in the Constructors' Championship. Jordan, in terms of the championship battle, Felipe Drugovich, obviously the championship leader going into the weekend. Are you surprised that Felipe is leading the championship, albeit at a very early stage in the season? And we've had a question in from @MiloCollins54 on Twitter, who asked, do you think that he and your former team, MP, can sustain a title challenge for the rest of the season?
Where do we start? As we're five questions in one there. Yeah, he's done a very good job, but I think we've seen he's been strong anyway. Previously with MP, he had some good results, and then a bit of a tough year for him last year. It probably felt a bit like a bit of a homecoming for him coming back to MP, a little bit like myself. But I think in general, if you look at the whole grid, there's plenty of people that can win races. And if you look back a bit further, back in the day, there might be one or two teams that were very strong. And even if you extract those to say ART or DAMS in the past who have won lots of championships, Prema came in, won the championship. You've now got UNI Virtuosi, MP who are up there. Campos are looking strong. Trident are looking strong. Well, everyone's looking strong. I think to my point, you take everybody, all 11 teams, all of them can win races, where maybe in the past it was a bit more leaning towards some of the bigger, stronger teams, where over the last few years, every team has seemed to have made a few changes, employed some people, pushed a bit harder, and up their game, up their level, and now everyone can win it. So to answer your question, yes, I think Felipe and MP can challenge for the title. I mean, you don't go leading the championship after 2 race weekends on complete luck. Is it going to last the whole year for them? I think it's yet to be seen, because they've not been in that position. But everyone's capable of winning races, which is going to make it really tough. But they're doing it now, so why can't they do it the rest of the year? I suppose is where I sit on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And in your opinion, obviously, a difficult season for Felipe Drugovich last year. From a driver's perspective, what is it? Is it a confidence thing that he goes back to MP and is all of a sudden, on good form again? What is that? What is the change that we've seen in him?
Yeah, I don't know exactly without going to speak to him. He did also have that tough year last year where you would say he was in a better car, or at least a proven winning car, and didn't quite manage to put it all together. Sometimes teams have off years, so they don't quite. We're talking about a sport where 1/10 of a second is the difference between winning and finishing last, quite literally, and that's not even a percent. Whereas other sports, you can be within 5% and still be looking pretty good. So, it's a very tight sport, as Lawrence even said in testing, proved that it's even tighter this year. So you've got that aspect of it, that maybe it just wasn't quite right for him at the team. They couldn't quite get the car where they wanted. Maybe he didn't quite gel correctly with the personnel behind the team. They didn't trust his feedback quite as much. He didn't trust them to set the car up. All these little things can just add up. And as we say, it only needs to be a 0.1% off, and that's it, kind of game over. So, yeah, who knows without actually asking him, but it could just be those things. Clearly, the guys at MP are doing a good job. They're putting out a good car, and they must work well together. We often see, if you look at other sports, football managers jump into different teams, struggle at one team, but do a really good job at another team. And it can sometimes just be as simple as that. The engineer that he's got at MP understands him and manages to put the car out for him just in a slightly better window than other engineers. Not to say that other engineers aren't as good, it just the way it works sometimes. I've worked with engineers that you kind of almost didn't need to tell them. They can just kind of look at you and go, yeah, I know where we need to go, or look at the data and know where we need to go. And others, you need to explain it in a slightly different way to get them to understand it. And it's not that any are better and worse, not really that the team's better and worse. It's just quite hard to extract that information out of them. And he's now in year 2 with MP, whereas, maybe his first year there, he hadn't quite worked out how to tell his engineer what he wanted from the car. Now he's gone back second year round. He's gone straight in there. He's more confident in the car and championship because he's done it, the tyres, how the weekends operate. And he knows how to talk to his engineer. So the experience probably pays dividend.
And it would be great for Formula 2 as well for Felipe Drugovich and MP to win the title if they were very early stage in the season. But for MP to win the team standings would be brilliant.
Yeah. I would love MP to win, as I kind of been my family for years. So to have helped them along the journey and to be a part of it, it would feel very rewarding.
Yeah, fingers crossed. And Lawrence, obviously, moving into round 3 now. We're heading into Europe. It's, as we said, an important part of the season. Who needs a strong weekend this weekend? Is there anyone in particular that stands out that you think needs a strong weekend?
I think in terms of who needs a strong weekend, absolutely everybody. Every single driver on that grid needs a strong weekend. Even Felipe Drugovich, even with the lead that he has, he is realistic enough to know that if he's serious about winning the title, he needs to be putting in those performances week in, week out, and he'll want to earn even more points this weekend to enhance his lead. I think in terms of drivers who will particularly feel like they need to make a step up this weekend, I think you have to pick out Dennis Hauger as the reigning F3 champion. We saw in that series his talent. We've seen how other drivers, the likes of Oscar Piastri, who I think Oscar is an exceptional driver, and it's perhaps not quite fair to make that comparison, but other drivers have managed to make the step up from F3 to F2 and be a little bit quicker from the offset. Teo Pourchaire managed to do that last year as well. So I think he definitely needs a strong weekend because I think he has that quality to be up there fighting for it. And if he was have a bad round 3, then all of a sudden, even though we do have a longer calendar this year than previously, it will start to look like a long road back to the top of the table for him. I mentioned Teo Pourchaire. I think he needs a strong weekend. He's had the pace. He hasn't had the reliability in the car, simple as that. The amount of points that he's got isn't a reflection of how well he's driven so far, and he will particularly feel like he needs to make a bit of an improvement. But there are several drivers around him that will feel the exact same way. Juri Vips could have had a win, and then of course had that issue with the pit stop, which sent him down the field. He managed to recover to P3, but lost points for him. So I think pretty much everybody up and down the field will need a good result this weekend to keep their hopes alive.
Yeah, you've mentioned High-Tech there, obviously top of the team standings, as we've said. Both of their drivers have had pretty strong starts to the season, you'd have to say. We've spoken a lot about Juri Vips, but I want to talk about Marcus Armstrong, who's perhaps gone a little bit under the radar this season so far. I mean, he's put in some really good performances, had some good pace, and he may well be in the top 5 of the standings if he hadn't have spun in the sprint race in Jeddah. And I know it's a season of if buts and maybes for every driver up and down the grid. But obviously, yeah, it's a stronger start to the season than perhaps from the outside. Can he compete this weekend, Hannah?
I absolutely think that he can. He's shown previously that he's got the speed and he's got the talent. He wouldn't have made it to this point in his career without them. I think the challenge for him is he just seems to have either poor consistency and very unlucky on occasions, like, for example, spinning out in Jeddah. I think at the moment he's sitting 7th in the standings on 20 points. It's his 3rd season in Formula 2. He needs to be able to perform. It gets to the point where, for a lot of the drivers, the longer it goes on, it does become more difficult to stand out. I think, for example, with Felipe Drugovich, the fact that he's leading the championship in his third season allows him to stand out. And I think for Marcus, he needs that similar level of consistency. And I think for him and Yuri, they're both gelling quite well at the high-tech team. I think it's a good environment for him. He seems to be very positive, very suited for the race weekends. And I think this time around, if you look at the point standings, he's got 20 points after 2 rounds. His first season, he got 52 points after 12 rounds. He has shown across the 2 weekends that he has got that level to pull those results out. It's just making sure not to I think it's maybe, I don't want to say kind of temper things, but sometimes maybe to accept your losses, maybe. For example, if losing a position means you get a haul of points, do you go for the move or not? But then the racing drivers at the end of the day, they're going to go for every move they can spot. And so I think for him, it's just going to be all about pulling that level of consistency that he needs out of these weekends and maximising the potential he has in the car. And hopefully, having had the in-season test, he'll have a bit more knowledge to be able to get that reference point for the team, to be able to identify if there is an issue, say, for example, in qualifying or say with tyre wear and things like that. He can identify them now quickly on that car, get the improvements and go out there. Because as Lawrence said about drivers needing a good weekend, I think at this point, he needs a strong weekend out there. And potentially before we head into several tracks that he's previously podiumed at. So I'll be interested to see how he gets on.
Cool. Could be a dark horse, one to watch maybe. Speaking of which, shall we do some quick fire questions? Hannah, I'm going to come to you first. Pole position this weekend, who do you think?
Oh, I'm going to go Yuri Vips. I'm just banking on Yuri.
Cool. One to watch for this weekend, Lawrence?
Ayumu Iwasa had a very strong start to the season, and we've seen his quality in terms of overtaking. What will he do after 2 rounds in the bag and testing and a bit more knowledge and experience, more time to work with the team? I'll be very interested to see how he gets on.
Absolutely. And Jordan, who's going to be our championship leader by the end of the weekend?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. You should have asked me one of the previous 2 questions. Had answers for that. Championship leader. Who's second in the championship and by how many points?
Liam Lawson, not far behind.
Yeah, he's gonna be leading it. That's who I'm going for.
There we go. That's what Jordan thinks.
There you go.
Okay, that's all we have time for today. My thanks to Jordan, to Hannah, and to Lawrence for joining me on today's show. And thank you to you guys at home for watching as well. If you've enjoyed the show, make sure you give it a like, subscribe for more Formula 2 content, hashtag the F2 show to get involved in the conversation. But from me, Fraser Ford, and all of us here at Inside F2, we'll see you next time.